Hi, I'm Ellen from the Chili Dog, and I just completed the yoke of my Wallflower sweater. This sweater is worked from the top down, and before I knit the body of my sweater, I'm going to teach you how to divide the body by placing the sleeve stitches onto waste yarn, and more importantly, how to cast on the stitches at the underarm of the sweater. Let's get started. I've worked across the front of my sweater to the point where the pattern directs me to put these sleeve stitches onto a piece of waste yarn. And the whole idea behind this is that you want to hold these live sleeve stitches out of the way so that you can pick them up and work them later after the body of the sweater is complete. And the process is very similar to putting a lifeline through stitches. It's important that you use a smooth waste yarn that's not going to felt into your work, and it's helpful to use a contrasting color. Now, often when I'm doing lifelines, I'll use dental floss or a thin cotton yarn to put in the lifeline, because then it's not going to stretch out my stitches at all as I'm working them. However, when I am putting stitches onto a waste yarn holder, generally I like to use something that's just a little bit thicker, but still it's a smooth yarn that's not going to felt into my work. So as you can see, I have already thread my waste yarn onto a yarn needle. And now I just want to slip these stitches without twisting them onto this piece of waste yarn. So you insert your yarn needle through the stitches purlwise, so you don't twist them at all. And you're just going parallel to the knitting needles through the stitches, and you can drop each stitch off your knitting needle as you are transferring them over to the waste yarn. So I am just going purlwise right through the center and dropping them off my needle and placing them onto my waste yarn holder. So I'll just work across and finish this up. Once all of your waste yarn is onto, or through your stitches rather, you can just pull that yarn needle through and then you can take the yarn needle off the yarn here. I'm going to pull out my stitches. So now all of my sleeve stitches are on this piece of waste yarn. I'm going to trim the waste yarn, leaving fairly generous tails on each side, just because I don't want it to accidentally slip back through the stitches. And then, because again, I do not want it to lose this waste yarn and have it come out of these stitches, or it will start unraveling. So as I'm working the body of my sweater, it's important that this is secured. So I'm just going to tie a little knot right here, and this just ensures that there's no way that that waste yarn can be pulled out through the stitches. All of them are nice and safe. After your sleeve stitches are held out of the way, generally you need to cast on a few stitches at the underarms between the front and the back of the sweater for it to fit properly. And there's a variety of different ways you can cast on underarm stitches. Many people like using the backwards loop method because it's definitely the quickest. I typically prefer using a cable cast on because it creates a little bit nicer edge that's going to make things easier and neater to pick up stitches later when we come back to work the sleeve of the sweater. A cable cast on is worked from left to right. So even though we're working in the round for our sweater, we need to turn things over to the other side just to cast on our stitches. So now we're looking at the wrong side of our work, or the purl side of our work. So we're going to make sure to cast on our stitches purlwise. Again, this is something that's going to be helpful later when we're picking up the stitches to work the sleeve of the sweater, because we won't have any purl bars on the right side of our work, And that's going to make the underarm transition between the body and the sleeve a little bit smoother. So to cast on that first stitch, you're going to bring your right working needle through that first stitch purlwise, because we're going to cast on all our stitches purlwise. Create our new stitch and pull it through the loop. And now we need to transfer this new stitch back onto our left needle. And oftentimes when you're doing a cable cast on, you will twist that stitch as you're transferring it back. And this creates a more pronounced and decorative cast on edge. However, to minimize the bulk of the edge, since it's at the underarm of our sweater, we're just going to transfer this new stitch onto the left needle without twisting it at all, and then tighten things up. Thought I split my yarn there. So now to cast on the remaining stitches, we bring our working needle between two stitches on our left needle, purlwise, create our new stitch, pull it through the loop, transfer it back without twisting it, and then tighten things up. That's 2. Let me show you one more. Bring your working needle purlwise between the 2 loops, create your new stitch, pull it through, and then transfer it back to the left needle without twisting it, and tighten things up. So I'm going to continue casting on the rest of my 14 stitches. I've cast on my last stitch, but before I transfer it back over to the left needle, I'm going to do something just a little bit different. I'm going to take my working yarn, and right now it's at the front of my work. I'm going to bring it between my 2 needles to the back of my work, and then transfer my stitch over. And again, you're transferring it without twisting. Pulling that working yarn between the needles does a couple of things. First of all, it keeps these last 2 stitches from accidentally leapfrogging over each other. More importantly, it's going to minimize the tension between your last cast on stitch and this first stitch that you're going to start knitting, and that helps ensure that this first stitch doesn't get stretched out. Once all our stitches are cast on, we're going to turn our work over so we can continue back in the round. And I'm also going to do one other thing. I cast on 14 stitches, and I need to know where the center of that is. I need to place a marker there. So I'm going to place a marker back 7 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I'm just going to hook a marker in there, and that just marks the side of my sweater. And again, this is just something that my pattern is telling me to do because I need to do something special here at the side of the sweater. So I've got my marker at the center, and now we're ready just to continue on knitting our sweater. So right now the yarn is at the front of the work because we had pulled it through between those 2 stitches. So bring it under the needle so that it's at the back so that we can continue knitting. Slide our stitches up, and now we're just going to continue on and work the back of the sweater. And then once we get across the back, I will do the same thing on the other side. I will place my sleeve stitches onto a holder and then cast on my stitches at the underarm on the other side. I hope you enjoyed learning how to divide the body of a top-down sweater and cast on the underarm stitches. And if you did, make sure to give this video a thumbs up. If you're ready to try this technique in a pattern, head over to the shop section of thechilidog.com and look for my Wallflower sweater. Until we stitch again, happy knitting!